So, what is with the two EverQuest Next games? Pretty much the first questions people new to this daring project have is, why are there two games coming out and what are the differences? Here are two ways to look at this. First, there's the order of events. They decided during the second reboot of this project to build a destructible world. That means voxels. That means all the buildings and world design could be done using simple tools that many outside the art department could use. Usually something like Maya is needed, which takes at least a year of training to master. When they realized that they were getting really good locations and buildings made by essentially amateurs, they went and built a new game around these dev tools. That is the point. Landmark wasn't originally a game, but the same tools they use to make EverQuest Next. Kind of like open source software, or they are opening up the content creation pipeline to their player base, which is at least 15 levels of genius. It's like the development version of crowdfunding, the way of the future. So as we build content for EverQuest Next, and polish the sandbox features that will go from Landmark to EQN, they are building elements such as the AI for the PvP and destructible physics and group content that will slowly filter back into Landmark. It's a symbiosis. Now, while we know that all of Landmark will eventually get into EverQuest Next to some degree, we and they don't know how much of EverQuest Next will end up in Landmark, as SOE are basically making it up on the fly. That's why there is conflicting data on Landmark. Literally no one knows where this will end up. This makes the potential growth of Landmark second to none, as you have both the infinite potential of everything the players can build and a vast AAA project that is going to provide Landmark with lots and lots of extra content of every kind, common to both theme parks and sandboxes. The other point is about the nature of sandboxes versus theme parks. Most of the time, an MMO is a theme park with none or only token sandbox elements, such as Arcade or WildStar's adding of sandbox onto a theme park foundation, limiting it with either separate continents or a plug and socket technology. But with EverQuest Next, the opposite is true. It's literally built with sandbox material, so the devs have to now come up with ways of controlling and restricting the normal level of freedom that would exist in games like Minecraft, Worm, Zion, Tug, etc. The EverQuest Next developers cannot allow such freedom, as it would just be an open build game and not EverQuest, not in setting, characters, lore, plot, etc. And so they are building limitations onto EverQuest Next, such as regrowing the world, limited locations for housing and types of buildings, but also compromising by making a pure sandbox with no restrictions. It's coming out first, as they already have the tools and none of the limitations installed. This is the opposite to theme parks becoming more sandbox like Rift or Final Fantasy XIV, at least in terms of player housing in those cases. So think of Landmark as a sandbox game that gets extra theme park features such as mobs and combat, and even more sandbox mechanics such as the story bricks artificial intelligence, from the game that it was always meant to build. While EverQuest Next is a hybrid of theme park developer content with a very, very strong sandbox tone in terms of destructibility, permanent open world change, non-linear adventuring and exploring above and below ground, horizontal and multi-class progression, and I suspect some very interesting and visually dramatic PvP. So, in a nutshell, EverQuest Next is everything that many of us have been looking for in an MMO, while EverQuest Next Landmark is the developer tools for that game that have been turned into a game in its own right. It's funny how you can sometimes make certain things more fun by simplifying it. There are many games that allow you to do things that would be fun if done in real life, such as race car driving. However, there are other things that would probably not be quite as interesting, such as being mayor of a large city or a farmer. but take out the tedious details and suddenly you have a game. Well, here we have EverQuest Next Landmark, which is basically a game about game development.